Okay, well, I guess I'll get started. I'm under great pressure here because I learned about this cognition decline, and there are 4 people in the audience who know this paper as well as I do, the Discussant and my 3 co-authors, and all of them are earlier in that decline than I am. So we'll see how I can do, and if I really mess it up, they can bail me out, I hope. Oh, thank you, John. So anyway, what we're interested in doing is, as the title says, looking at the financial feasibility of delaying Social Security. And Sita and I and others have worked on the advantages of delaying the commencement of Social Security, and they're really quite high for many people, and yet not many people do it. And then so we're going to ask why don't they do it? And one theory is they don't have enough money, and so we're going to look to see, do they have enough money in a sense. So the first slide here shows the different amounts you get for claiming at different ages. So if you look at the first column, at the so-called normal retirement age, sometimes called the full retirement age, you get 100% of what the formula says you get. But if you collect it early, at the earliest possible, you get 75% of what the formula says. And if you wait till 70, you get 132% of what the formula says, of your PIA, if you like. And this just shows you the rate of return in terms of monthly benefits of waiting another year. Interestingly, they kind of bounce around, but they're of the order of 8%. Your benefits go up roughly 8% a year for waiting. And I would point out just 2 possible numbers. One is the 100 and the 80, the number at 63 and the number at 66. So when Social Security first offered choice as to when to start Social Security, which was 1956, women could choose to start at 62 or any time between 62 and 65. And if they started at 62, they got 80%. If they waited until 65, they got 100%. In other words, that 80 and 100 for a 3-year delay was true in 1956. It's true today. It's never been changed for 60 years. And meanwhile, mortality's changed dramatically. Interest rates have changed dramatically. Even the rules have changed, so it now is changed favorably. So what might have been an actuarially fair deal is now an actuarially very advantageous deal. And so that's the part of the reason why delaying claiming can be very profitable today. So we've looked at it. Now, one thing that Social Security does is they actually offer as retirement benefits 4 different kinds of life annuities. They offer, in some circumstances, a first-to-die annuity. In other words, you're a couple and the benefits only last until the first death. They also offer a single life annuity for men, a single life annuity for women, and a second-to-die annuity for couples where the benefits go for both lifetimes. With 100% for the survivor. There was a full benefit for the whole time. Now, amazingly, these 4 annuities, which are actually quite different in value, all cost the same price. So obviously, if you're in one circumstance, it's a great deal. If you're in other circumstances, not so much. So how does it sort out? Well, it turns out that deferring is a good deal for single men, and it's a better deal for single women, and it's actually about actuarially fair for the low earner in a couple. It doesn't, there's no big deal about deferring if you're the low earner in a couple, because that's the one that gets the shortest annuity, namely a first-to-die annuity. And it's a great, really good, very good deal for the high earner in a couple, because that's the one that gets the second-to-die annuity, which lasts about 11 years longer than a first-to-die annuity. Yeah. I'm just comparing about waiting 1 month, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. The more you wait, the bigger annuity you get. So by by not collecting for a few months, you're buying a larger annuity. Okay? All two-way comparisons. Okay. So the gains from delay have increased over time substantially, particularly for people born after 1938. There have been rule changes. Many of the rule changes are that if you retire or start collecting after the normal retirement age, it used to be you got nothing for waiting after the normal, then you got 1 or 2%, and it got 6 and then 7. It's 8% a year now. So that the rule changes have improved. There have been other rule changes like file and suspend. But a big part of it is this just very gradually, because month to month it doesn't change, but mortality rates are roughly half of what they were 60 years ago. And then interest rates, they designed this thing to be actuarially fair with a 2.9% real interest rate. Well, today, real interest rates are about 0 for governments, if not negative. So everything has changed to make deferring much more favorable. Some people, it seems, think of retirement and starting Social Security as the same thing. They just do them together, as if they're just one decision, but we're saying it could be two decisions. When should I retire? When should I start Social Security? Maybe I want to wait because the deal for waiting is so good. So what do people do? Well, on this axis is basically wait time. It's the time between when you turn 62 or when you stop working and when you start collecting Social Security. And you're not going to find a more concentrated graph than this. All the mass is at 0 months, 1 month, and 2 months. In other words, you get and start your Social Security as soon as you can. And believe it or not, there are people that are deferring for 5 years or even 8 years, but these bars are so short you can't even see them. So essentially nobody's deferring very long between when they stop work and when they start Social Security. So the question is, why is it? Why don't people delay? So one theory is, hey, they don't have the money to delay. What are they going to live on while they're delaying? There's lots of theories. One is that they may have private information. Couldn't be everybody does, but some of them may have private information about mortality. They think, hey, I'm not in very good health, so I'm going to get my money now. Waiting would be crazy for me. By the way, that theory isn't so great for couples, because as a high earner of a couple, because they may overemphasize their own mortality. It actually depends on the mortality of each of them and how long the survivor is going to live. They may just be impatient for the money. They may think, I think incorrectly, that they'll be better off if and when Social Security is reformed. If they've already started collecting, they better get the money now before the thing goes broke. Who knows? They just may undervalue this annuity, and we've seen other studies. Maria's done one for teachers. They just don't value those incremental annuities as much as we think they should, and so forth. They may think the full retirement age or the normal retirement age is just the words themselves tell them that's when you should take it, and because almost no one takes it after that, even though the returns are quite good for doing so. So we're going to explore particularly this one, do they have enough money, and to some extent, what do they know about their mortality? The first part, the main part of the paper, uses a very big data set. This is basically all the tax returns in the United States filed for the 13 years between 1999 and 2011. Now, we slice that data severely. For instance, we're only going to look at the people born in 1940. We start with all the tax returns, then we just look at people born in 1940. We sort out some other things. We drop married women. In this cohort, the primary earner, which we're particularly interested in, the high earner in the couples, most likely the male in the couple. If you were on disability, we drop you. If you started claiming before 62, there's got to be something special about you. Maybe you're getting survivor benefits, we drop you, and so forth. But even after slicing and slicing and slicing, we still have 1.1 million observations. So we have a big data set that we're able to use. What we're getting is tax returns. So we can observe your IRA balances in particular off of this Form 5498. We can observe the withdrawals from your pensions in this 1099-R form. We can and from your IRAs. We know when you started Social Security off your 1099 SSA. We know your wage income, your self-employment income, and so forth. Just imagine what's on the tax return. That's what we know. We don't know anything else in this data set. And so we're going to look at these. We're going to look at when do you start your IRA and when do you start your Social Security. Now, if you didn't have enough money to delay, you'd think that you'd be liquidity constrained. Maybe you'd start your IRA first just to get to the money. But anyway, we're going to look at that. We're also going to look at how big are your IRA balances. We know much more about IRA balances than we know about other forms of wealth, like 401k money or stocks and bonds, although we could have done something with that, with dividends and interest and so forth. And we're going to look at HRS later for some of that information. But by just looking at IRAs, we're certainly getting a lower bound on how long you could defer. Let me just give you an idea. If you're at 62 years old, many Social Security benefits would be of the order of $1,000 a month. So to delay for 2 years, you need about $24,000. These aren't huge amounts. But if you were the primary earner, the present value of the expected present value of the extra annuity wouldn't have an actual value of $24,000. It's about $48,000, about $2 per dollar. They're giving you an extra annuity worth twice what you're delaying and not receiving. And that extra annuity, which is worth $48, would probably cost $60 from an insurance company. The government's selling it for $24, and few people are taking it. So that's kind of the puzzle. Very similar in some ways to Maria's study about teachers. Here are the ages at which people start their Social Security. And notice a full 35% of them started at 62. As soon as the gates are open, they get it. Other people are still working. And that first graph showed you they basically start Social Security when they stop working, or when the earnings test goes off at 65 and a half for this cohort. Essentially nobody. Remember, these people were all born in 1940, so in 2002 they were 62, in 2003 they were 63, and so forth. So it's kind of easy to remember their ages. So nobody's waiting essentially to 67, 68, 69, or 70. By 66, basically everybody has started their Social Security. So that's what that looks like. Here's the ages at which they first start withdrawing from their IRA account. So these graphs look a little different. Lots of people are waiting till 70 and a half to withdraw from their IRA accounts. So they're patient with respect to IRA withdrawals, impatient with respect to Social Security withdrawals, if you want to call it that. Some people might start at 59 and a half, but basically there is a lot of delay or waiting. This graph basically shows the difference. The darker bars are all people who started their Social Security before they collected anything from their IRAs. The light bars are the ones who got the IRAs first. This big bar here are people who collected their Social Security at the normal retirement age, 65 and a half, but didn't collect their IRAs until they had to at 70 and a half, because that's when you have a mandatory withdrawal. And so that's what that bar is. But basically, you can see a bulk of this difference is starting Social Security first. And then this is one of our, I think, primary results of the paper. And what this is just looking at IRA balances, what fraction of the population have enough money to live on or to replace the Social Security that they could receive and delay 2 years or delay 4 years. And so this upper line here says that about 35% of the population in their IRA accounts alone have enough to defer for 2 years. They can match 2 years worth of Social Security from their IRA balances. This lower bar is how many can, which is 25% roughly, have enough money for 4 years of living. You're replacing Social Security out of their IRA withdrawals, deferring, and then getting the bigger Social Security because they delayed. So that's in some sense, that's the answer from the tax data. This graph just shows what the mortality experience is for people who, the middle line is for people who started Social Security at their full retirement age, 65 and a half. The upper line is the mortality of people who started early, before their normal retirement age, and the lower line is the mortality of people who started later. So sure enough, the people who start early have worse mortality than the people who start late. There aren't many of them that start late, but so there is some sorting by mortality. Some of these may not be intentional. It's just that if you're high mortality, you're probably also not so healthy. Maybe that's why you leave work early, and then you start your Social Security when you leave work just like everybody else does. So it's not necessarily that you decided to collect early. Almost everybody's collecting early, or collecting as soon as they can. But it is true that those who do claim early, they probably leave their job earlier, and they start their Social Security earlier, and they have higher mortality. These differences are not enough to wipe out the gains from deferral. In another study, Sita and I looked, and we found that even smokers should actually defer Social Security. These are people whose mortality is 2 times average. The gain is sufficient that it's still useful for them. By the way, if you are a 65-year-old today whose mortality is 2 times average, is no worse than the average 65-year-old was in 1955. When the deal was struck. This deal never changes. It hasn't ever been changed, except improved. So we also looked at the HRS data. Now the advantage of the HRS data is there's a lot more information about the people. Of course, there's a lot fewer of them. But now we can not only ask about their IRA balances and their IRA withdrawals, but we can ask about what's their financial wealth and what ratio of financial wealth to the benefits do they have. And we kind of dropped a similar group of people. We dropped the married women. We dropped those who receiving disability and so forth, less than 10 years of work. But it's basically a similar sorting of the data. And we're going to compare the claiming behavior of those with high wealth and low wealth and so forth. I just wanted to point out a couple of numbers here. I'm going to start with these 2 numbers, the 35 and the 26. This is from the HRS data. The 35 is what fraction have an IRA balance of greater than 2 times their Social Security. Same number we got before from the IRS. Samely with 4 times, 26. I think we said 25 before. So actually the HRS data confirms the IRS data, or maybe I should have said that the other way around. The IRS data confirms the HRS data on those. But if you look at a broader measure of wealth, you get that 64% of people have enough to defer for 2 years. Again, it's about $25,000. And more than half have enough to defer for 4 years. So we think, given that nobody does it, it looks like the majority of people could do it. They have enough money that they could do a significant deferral, but they don't by and large. This just shows the percent claiming early by different wealth categories. Do you have more than 2 years worth of wealth or 4 years worth of wealth? I'm not going to go, I'm going to concentrate on this particular middle column. Those are those born 1938 or after in the HRS data. And the main thing I want to just point out is the majority of people in all categories are declaring early, are claiming early. Whether you have a lot of wealth, a little wealth, yeah, there's a little difference, but basically everybody's claiming early. The wealthy aren't waiting. Those that don't have money aren't waiting. Nobody's waiting. I mean, nobody is obviously an exaggeration, but not many are waiting. I think I'm going to leave this as just data description. I think I'll leave that one alone. Here, I just want to show you that, say you wanted to know who is self-declaring themselves in good health, and you said, well, what if they claimed early? How much would it affect the probability that they're going to end up in good health? Self-declaim, not very much. The 84% of the population says that they're in good health. It makes a 3% out of the 84 difference if you claim early. In other words, the early claimers are predominantly in good health, 81% of them are, instead of the average of 84% of the population. It's not a big deal, not a big sorter. It has the sign that you would expect, but it's not a big deal. Similarly, what's the self-assessed probability to be alive at 75? 68% of the general population thinks that they'll be alive at 65, 66%, 2% difference for the early claimers. Not much difference. The point is these are small effects. Many of the effects are not significant. What I come away with is this early claiming or claiming as soon as possible is nearly universal. But it shouldn't be, because I think the majority of people could gain from deferring. So that's basically what we have. We have that individuals claim Social Security before taking distributions from IRAs, which is kind of it seems like they're deferring. They're impatient with Social Security and they're patient with IRAs, and it seems like maybe should be the other way around, given the deal for waiting from Social Security. A significant fraction, so I think this kind of dismisses the idea that all these observations are because people just don't have enough money to do this financial engineering of taking their defined contribution assets first and Social Security later. More than half the population has enough money to do that. And then, yeah, early claimers do have higher actual and subjective mortality. They report that they're in worse health, but these effects are not big enough to really wipe out the gains from delay. So delay claiming. So that's what we have. How did I do? Jason. It must be something of the order of 50%. Remember, a lot of IRAs are result from rollovers. The money was put in as a 401k, but ends up as an IRA.
All right. So my name is Jason Scott. I work at a company called Financial Engines. Definitely appreciate the opportunity to talk about the paper. Very interesting paper. I've had a lot of discussions actually with John about Social Security claiming. We've done some research, and I think this pretty much closes the door on the notion that lots of people are claiming because early because they just don't have a lot of assets or don't have enough assets to defer. Because by and large, at least when you look at people who do have the assets, they claim early as well. And so I was thinking, well, what could I do to add to this discussion? And I think the natural thing to do is to start coming up with hypotheses about why people don't defer. And I started doing that, and I remembered a story that Bill Sharp told me about 15 years ago that he was relating about his time working at Rand. And I know there's a lot of, Bill Sharp's not here, but I know there's a lot of Rand people here, so maybe this will speak to you guys as well. Anyway, he said that they were in a conference room, research group. They were talking about a project, and for some reason they needed to estimate the number of Mexican nationals who were pilots in Mexicana Air. And so they started thinking, well, we could look at the size of the Mexican Air Force. Maybe that's where pilots are trained. The size of the Mexicana Air pilot force, look at tenure at the Air Force and hazard rates for job turnover. And he said an earthy member of the research group came in, listened to this for a few minutes, and exclaimed, "Oh, for crying out loud!" Walked over, picked up the phone, called Mexicana Airlines and asked them, how many? And apparently, at least 40 years ago, most of the pilots at Mexicana Airline are Mexican nationals. So anyway, the point there was when you can, and you can pick up the phone and get some some information kind of closer to the source, do it. And so that's what I want to try to do here. So a little bit of background. Financial Engines, we help people plan for and retire. It's through the employer. We have about 890,000 clients. The thing here that I wanted to point out is of our clients between 60 and 65, the median 401k balance is more than $100,000, so plenty of money to defer a couple years if they chose to. Just last year, we released a Social Security planner that's free. You can go in and sort of get some recommendations. I'm not going to have time to do the demo, but if the slides are available, it's in there, and people are interested, and it's available on the corporate website. What I wanted to point out there, though, is we've had literally thousands of Social Security calls. We have advisors. People can call up, get help with financial planning and the like. Lots of times the calls are related to Social Security. The near universal recommendation, as the numbers kind of imply, is to defer. And so it seemed to me that's a lot of information about why people don't defer is sort of locked up in those advisor calls. I didn't have time to do a formal survey or the resources, but I was able to pick up the phone and call David Ankrum, who heads our advisor center, and ask him, why do people not defer when you talk to them? So he was kind enough to do to ask his advisors, get some responses, summarize them for me, and I wanted to take you through that because there was a number that I wouldn't have thought of just sort of musing on my own. So some interesting stuff in there. The one thing I'm going to do to add to that is I will do a quick calculation, kind of a side calculation, to sort of say, is that reason for deferring of the right magnitude to kind of overcome this benefit of deferring? And I guess by and large, they're not, but you'll get an idea of how far off they are, and maybe there's ways to mix and match. And I think there's a couple of things there where they might be things for you to look at, you and your co-authors, John, on things that might help explain. Most people take it early, so no matter what you do, you're going to always have most people taking it early. But there might be some covariates in there that might help explain it. So here we go. Just so that people know, this is the calculation that goes on all the time. It's a net present value calculation. You take the particular cash flows from now to however long. You've got to discount them by two things. One is the chance you get that cash flow, which is the survivor. You've got to survive to a particular age in order to get the cash flow at that age, or the Social Security payment. And then you discount them at some market rate of interest. It's a real rate because the cash flows for Social Security are real. And for the example that I'm going to think about, have in the back of my head and report some numbers for you, is the survival curve is coming from a female curve, age 66. I happen to have the IRS mortality that DB plans are required to use to calculate cash payout, so I use that, but they're all similar enough for my purposes. And you can think about someone that's getting an annual benefit of either $24,000 at age 66, or 8% higher than that, $25,920 at age 67, $2,000 a month, if you like it that way. And the real rate I chose was 1%. You could certainly argue 0. All that's kind of, I think, nibbling around the edges. It's the big effect here is just a 1-year delay for this person. Again, this is kind of, in John's language, this was the better deal. This is for the female. It's about $10,000 in net present value for 1 year. Now, notice that they can do 8 years. And so, it's a pretty big effect. I do think it's reasonable to look at 1 year, though, even though you could think about 8 years, because every year you have the option to take it that year. And so you're kind of doing this sequence of, am I going to take it now or defer it a little longer? Am I going to take it now? So think about this as one of those intermediate decisions. Okay, so here's some of the responses. Response number 1, health and longevity. And you can read that there. People kind of do an introspection. We saw a little data on that John presented. Family history and the like. The thing here, though, is that this is not anywhere close to big enough, except for someone that is, I think if you have a current affliction that really impairs your mortality, that could be big enough. But you could think about how big a mortality is required to equate these two Social Security strategies, defer and not defer. In the example that I'm working with, it took about a mortality multiplier of 2.5 times. And smokers are only two. So it's hard to define an unhealthy enough group that you know about, but you're not currently having an affliction to where you would have that mortality, but I guess it's possible. If you think about just an adding of mortality per year, like increasing your mortality a fixed constant, if you wanted to do that, you would need to add about 3% or so to the annual mortality rate. So maybe that is someone that, certainly if you have heart disease or diabetes, maybe maybe some of the demographers can help me. If you've had cancer, I would think that. So there would be situations where that could be true, but I don't think you're a healthy person looking back and going, granddad died at this age. That's not anywhere in the ballpark of these types of mortality situations. Okay, number 2. This is one I think you might want to look at, on debt repayment. The idea here is that a lot of people do not want to retire if they have debt. So what happens when they get to full retirement age, and now this is a little bit of a select sample, because the people that we work with work at large companies, and so that they have a higher incidence of DB plans, and they have a higher tendency to have some other wealth. So they do actually probably defer a little bit longer. So this was an interesting one, disliking debt and seeing the ability to both work and have Social Security as an ability to have extra liquidity to pay down debt prior to deciding to actually retire. And so I do think psychologically there might be something different between a person that has a $100,000 IRA and no debt, and a $100,000 IRA and $50,000 mortgage or something like that. So, and I think probably with the IRS, you'll get mortgage interest deduction, so you might be able to say something about that. So that was interesting. Just if you're really looking at this 1 year, so here's the question: what kind of interest rate would you need in order for paying it off 1 year later to kind of equate these two strategies? And I'll put it up, 48%. So, we're way beyond credit card rates here. So, okay. But that's what people are saying. Here's one, faith in Social Security. So, there's a lot of different ways faith in Social Security could manifest in people's minds. Here's the words of the client, I guess, kind of lock it in now, might not be available. There's a lot of talk about, Social Security is not solvent, so you could see people getting this concerned. There is one that sort of suggests an analysis, though. It's hard to read. I scanned in my Social Security statement, and there's a disclaimer, and it's the only thing bold on the page outside of some headings. And it says, I'll just say, 2033, 77% of scheduled benefits. So you might ask, what if you assume that they're right? That seems plausible. Does that do anything to the net present value? It does. So it's actually a difficult calculation. I could see people kind of messing that up. It turns out, though, that because it affects you in both strategies, it doesn't really make that big a deal, because you're really only taking 1 year where you're giving up 1 year in the unaffected group of years, and there's 15 or 16 or what have you, unaffected groups of years. And so it doesn't, but in both cases, whether you delay or not, all the benefits are going down by 23%. And so it's kind of still 8% higher in one than the other. And so the basic math goes through. It's a little bit. The 10,000 goes down to 8,000. If you made it the absolute worst and assumed you're going to defer in 2015 and they're going to lower it in 2016, so you're giving up the 1 year that wasn't going to be reduced, you're still positive. So that one, I mean, if it's in this form that people have the notion of it's going to be reduced, that one doesn't seem like it's a plausible from just a pure finance point of view that it's a big deal. Okay. Here's one that was portrayed to me as there's a majority. Like, most of the people that call think this. So there's this marriage of retirement and Social Security. It's what you do. It's how you take. So you retire and then you take it. There's something here about, I think, people getting kind of attached to a strategy, or they've organized their life somehow around this idea. And so talking to them is very hard to change that notion that, wait, I've planned for many years that I'm retiring here and I'm getting Social Security, and then we say, well, you could delay. But that sort of introducing it that late in the game, I think raises the bar for the difficulty of changing their minds. I don't know how you get at that. I do have another one of these that the next one relates to this and kind of marries things, retirement and Social Security. So I think there's a lot of things. Full retirement age kind of does that. This is one I didn't really realize. Integrated Social Security benefits. A lot of pensions, again, this is mostly big companies. They have DB plans that are integrated with Social Security. And what that means, there's different flavors. But one that's more direct is, I guess kind of the idea is the company pays for half of the Social Security tax, and so when you get your Social Security benefit, they count half the benefit as substituting for your DB plan. And so if your DB is $3,000 a month, that might say, but we're counting 1,000 of that for Social Security, and so to kind of get your pension, it kind of assumes you're taking Social Security, and so they kind of marry them in the context of the DB plan, at least in people's minds. So you got to kind of claim it in order to. Now, this doesn't change really the economics of deferral, because the calculation of the offset, if you will, is just based on a full retirement age, not when you actually, but your salary and your full retirement age. So, still on the margin, you can do everything you could before, and it wouldn't affect the offset. But this does kind of coordinate the idea of retirement and Social Security. So that one, to be fair, never really thought of that one before. So don't know how that would impact what you're working on there. Lots of liquidity constraints. So this is kind of perhaps the group that can't defer. I know you do some work on the impact of Medicare on work. Here, it's a reason to take Social Security early. So you don't qualify for Medicare until 65, but you can take Social Security at 62, so you can use it as a bridge to pay for health care costs before you qualify for Medicare. And certainly, liquidity constraints could make claiming required. Another liquidity constraint here, they do talk about insufficient assets, so certainly some people can't use money to defer Social Security. That's not really the group we're looking at, though. And the final one I want to talk about is discounting. I look at this equation, and I say that's a very difficult equation for people to kind of certainly calculate or understand. I think if we were to offer people a cash out and say, well, look, we'll give you $400,000 if you insist on taking your Social Security at 62, but if you'll just decide, write this sheet of paper, sign this, and take it at 68, we'll give you $500,000. I mean, if we offered them the net present value, they would certainly take the higher amount. So there's something about having to experience it in this one way that makes it different for people. Now, one thing that you should point out, though, I think, is that you cannot use Social Security for collateral for any loan. And so it's not always easy for people to kind of manipulate a Social Security payout in a way that might meet with what their preferences are in terms of how they want to spend money. That can make a big difference. So in that world, it's not even clear if a net present value is appropriate. It might be the case that you really want to go to something like a utility calculation. Very complex. This is not, this is giving you a flavor just playing around with the discounts. But if you move to utility, you would normally have utility of the consumption. I just left it as consumption just to focus in on the discounts. But the thing that mainly changes, the real rate of interest, sort of the market rate of interest, changes, and now you're looking at a subjective time discount for individuals. So that's the delta there. And then there's psychologists in the room, so back me up. I do think there's this notion of a lot of behavioral and psychological research that now is much better than later. And so a lot of your Social Security decision making is, do I want it now, which is great, or later, which is not so great. And so there's this hyperbolic discount factor, which I threw in. It's another potential discount factor. So just to give you an idea, if we use, so I brought out the first payment as different. It doesn't have the hyperbolic discount factor. So to give you an idea, there's a lot of combinations of these discount factors that could equate the two strategies. But if you looked at them separately, the time discount, you'd need about 4.5% to equate it. Or if real rates were 4.5%, that would kind of substitute the same. On the hyperbolic discounting, you would have to treat future payments as sort of 70% as good, all of them. They'd all as the today payment, and that would kind of because you're getting that one extra today payment. So the question is, are those plausible or not? Interesting. I just kind of went and I knew Lapson had done a bunch of work on this. So there's a Harrison-Lapson paper, Hyperbolic Discounting and Consumption. Just for grins, I was astounded, so I put it in. This is what they used. Now this was and. So they did a time discount of 4.5% and a beta or a hyperbolic discount of 0.7. So either one individually would be enough to sort of equate the two decisions, both together, and it's definitely you want to take it right away. Well, if you could, I think all of this would be solved, actually, if you could use Social Security as collateral, because people would loan them money and change their strategies. So maybe that's a research topic. Anyway, so here's a summary. Bunch of reasons. Poor health. Maybe if you're really sick, pay off debt, and single, yes. Pay off debt, not really. Faith in the payouts, didn't seem, there's probably a way you could structure that, but when I looked at it, it didn't seem to be enough. This idea that Social Security is retirement, I don't know how to quantify that kind of coordination and breaking the coordination for individuals. Liquidity constraints absolutely could be, but that's kind of to the side for this topic. And then kind of this discounting, there could certainly be something, you're constrained somehow. You're not getting a cash out. And so the more we move to the cash out world, or we're going to have to recognize the constraint, I think is there's going to be some of the answer in that realm. So a summary of the summary, why do people claim early? It seemed amazingly complicated. There's so much going on, but very good paper at knocking down, this idea that it's because people don't have the money. They do have the money, but there's something else.
So I thought Jason's comments were great, but just in this era of full disclosure, he is my former student.
Is that good or bad?
No, we just had, you might have gone easy on me.
Oh, no. I didn't know what to say. You're right.
So Matthew Shapiro. So another way of writing this paper is, are people thinking about their IRA right? Because what you're really asking them to do is cash out their IRA early and save. And there are a bunch of reasons why you might want the IRA. Some right, some wrong, some mistaken, some sensible. But if someone's got 24,000 roughly Social Security, you're asking them to say wait 8 years. They have a couple $100,000 in the IRA. That's probably a typical middle-income person. You're really asking them to really deplete most of their IRA, and that the reasons they might want to have the lump sum against, say, healthcare costs, nursing home costs. So that's a rational thing they might be thinking. There are also some irrational things, or people have been trained, I think, to think wait to the RMD, and you saw that popping out of that, and they would thought, well, you get the tax deferral. So maybe they learned that lesson a bit too well, and perhaps they're confused about the tax treatment. I mean, it looks pretty scary to take a lot of money out of the IRA because you pay, typically you have to, unless it's Roth treatment, have to pay a big tax wedge. Of course, the same thing is true for Social Security, but maybe if it looks like a 1 minus tau times your wealth versus 1 minus tau times a flow income, people are getting that wrong. So that's just another thing people could be confused about.
Well, you actually,
We're both going to answer a little bit, but, or at least comment. I mean, there's no easy answer, but certainly for couples, you know, if they want to reduce the deferral costs, the low earner can start collecting soon. And even there's another little trick where the high earner can claim to be the get the spousal benefit off the low earner's record and still defer their own. So this thing does not have to cost, $200,000 is more than enough to get most of these benefits. In fact, you could get most of the benefits for probably half that.
So that's exactly right. And when we tried to come up with strategies to propose to people, that was a major constraint. Like, how do you kind of get the most NPV boost while minimizing the cash outflow of your proposed strategy relative to take it as soon as possible? And that's because if you can get it kind of similar NPV but have only 50,000 out of pocket instead of 100,000, it's a better strategy. I think one thing about the Social Security and the IRA, though, we should see, I don't know if we will see in the IRS data, but there's a reason to separate those, because if you take a lot of money out of your IRA while you're taking Social Security, you make the Social Security that was mostly untaxed taxable, and so there's a very, very high marginal tax rate on dollars coming out of an IRA
If you're collecting
Social Security. So there's.
So that's another reason to do it first. When you're
Or you should at least bunch it.
Yeah.
So that you can have one Social Security that's highly taxed,
Yeah.
and then you won't have to do it the next year, and so it'll be kind of low tax, so you can lower your average tax rate on Social Security.
So, I've got the phone. First, thank you, John. This is a great paper, and I want to just tell you, we're seeing evidence, and also Boston College is producing evidence that people are starting to delay taking Social Security. And I'd like to think that they're listening to you and you're having an impact. But the point I wanted to make is that I want to add a refinement, Jason, to your last reason, and I think it's really important in this current environment, is a reason to think you might want to take Social Security early is you think that your invested assets could do better. You could do better by investing your assets than taking them down to delay Social Security. And so we've done some projections on that strategy which show to even have a chance of that strategy being successful, you have to invest all the way in the stock market and get stock market returns. And your discount rate showing 4.5% real rate is kind of about in the ballpark of what you might get from stock market returns. So the reason this is so important right now is that we've got proposals from the DOL saying that financial advisors need to act in the best interests of their clients. And I think it's going to be very hard for a financial advisor to advise that their client does not delay Social Security and then use their product or their services instead. It's really going to put them in a box. And so I think financial advisors that are not advising their clients to take IRA money or 401k money and delay Social Security, it's going to be hard for them to prove that they're acting in the best interest of their clients.
Good.
Particularly if they're invested in bonds, there's not a chance. If you are investing this IRA money in bonds, you have no chance of winning against delaying Social Security. And so those people that are claiming that they're going to make that they want to invest their money and win by that, they have to go 100% in stocks to do that. And they also have to be paying index expense, very low fees. The moment you start paying 100 basis points in fees, you're behind the 8 ball. So I just think this is going to be a very practical use of this money that's going to take hold pretty quickly if those DOL proposals go through on advisors having to act in the best interest of their clients. And I really would love to see John's work being cited as rationale for that.
Sita's work.
Thank you.
Shanti's work, and Gopi's work. Whoever, yeah. Whatever you want.
Well, I've got some data on people's claiming reasons. Suzanne and I collected in 2009 and 2010. About 2/3 of the people claimed when they had anticipated, and about 1/3 later, or earlier than anticipated, nobody later. Among those who claimed earlier of interest, needed access to additional income, 28% of those people. Lost my job, 21%. Lock-in benefits, 8%. Among those people who claimed when expected, lock-in benefits, 11%. Reach Social Security normal retirement age, 51%. Needed access to Social Security income, 13%. And so lock-in benefits, it's a fringe group.
Right.
Let me just mention one thing. All the Social Security people know this, but there's absolutely nothing special about the normal retirement age. Nothing at all. It's just a point on the schedule which they gave a label to, and 51% say I'm collecting because I reached the normal retirement age. It makes no sense.
One thing special.
What's that?
You don't have to, there's no sort of clawback based on income.
Oh, because of the earnings test.
There's no earnings test. So if you wanted to kind of have an earnings and Social Security at the same time, that begins to happen.
Fair enough. Yeah.
At 66. But it shouldn't, well, there's very little financial reason why that
I don't think
should be that big a
51%
deal.
are doing it for that reason.
No.
Suzanne or whoever.
Uh,
This is costing you cocktails.
Just so you know.
I'm going to ask anyway. You had this total puzzlement about sort of people who think about retirement and claiming eligibility, or claiming is the same. Are linked, married. I think it's the term you used. The old age was 65, and then it went to 62, and I recall seeing sort of some presentation, maybe in this room, of sort of a change in the spike. Sort of, and the question would be, would sort of studying that change in the spike sort of be an indication of sort of what kind of lags there are in learning about the fact that the world has really changed. You can work at a different.
I have seen some data on the change in the spike from 65 to 66 based on the moving of the retirement age.
But remember, the Medicare spike hasn't changed. That is, some people retire when they become Medicare eligible, which is still 65, and then they just collect Social Security because they think it's the same thing as.
Right.
So now there's a 65 and there's a 66 age that they might concentrate on.
So I'm always asking about policy implications because I'm at the GAO. And this really does have policy implications, and I thank you for the work. I was really interested in the reasons. We're just embarking on some work that I know we already bothered John about on SSA's role here and what can SSA do. They're a little bit boxed in on the statement for political reasons, on the, saying you're only going to get 77%, they can't take it out now. But we think that they could call the retirement age something different. We think that they could speak to people differently about this. And while I'm really hopeful that the fiduciary rules do change at labor, it's something that we think is really important. A lot of people are not going to have financial advisors. And they're going to go into Social Security, and there's a lot of incentives on both sides to claim right that second, and often it's right at age 62. So, we're going to talk to you guys more about, what are the kinds of things that the federal government can do to alter that message and to maybe get more information to people in a way that they can understand it. I agree with you. They're not going to deal with the equations.
Yeah, let me just make.
But I want to thank you for bringing it out because I
Thank
think it's
you,
a really important issue.
Let me just mention one thing that Jason said. That he said, if you wait a year, and his was a single woman waiting from 66 to 67, I believe. Right. And she picked up $10,000 or $11,000 for waiting a year. Well, if people understood that, by the way, it'd be much higher if it was a primary earner and a married couple. It'd be 20,000 or something like that. But if people just understood that how much more you get for starting Social Security later, I think there would be two mechanisms to take advantage of it. One mechanism would be this sort of financial engineering of I'll access my IRAs, my 401ks first. The other would be work longer. Just retire at 67 instead of at 66. And the consequences of that would be quite different for the federal budget, for instance, if people responded not by rearranging their money, but by just working longer. So I think people don't understand just this value slope, or whatever you want to call it, the more value for starting Social Security later. But if they did understand it, I think there would be two reactions, and one would be a working longer reaction, which kind of fits in the theme of this conference.
I just couldn't resist following up on the idea of renaming some of these labels. And when you think about it, starting at 62, that's early retirement. Early usually has positive connotations. Early bird gets the worm and all that. Full retirement age, which is not really the full retirement age, but at least that sounds like you're getting full. Whereas if you delay, you're called delayed retirement. And delayed usually has some negative connotations. So I would propose age 62 benefit is minimum retirement benefit, and age 70 is maximum benefit. And now you've got the labels aligning with the reality. So I just wanted to give you that suggestion if you're in the government.
Let's get one more over here. We aren't big drinkers, I can tell that.
The retirement part of the government, the people who were thinking about the well-being of older Americans probably want older Americans to know this. But it's not clear that the federal, that the people who pay the bills, the Congress really wants to, the taxpayer wants to increase the cost of Social Security by 25, 30%. And it would be a good thing for the people collecting it, but I'm not sure that that's the goal of the federal government. Parts of it, certainly.
Well, my name wasn't even mentioned, but most of you are like really proud of your JPE article or your AER article, but I'm really proud that there was a couple paragraph in Consumer Reports that mentioned this strategy, or at least deferring. So that's the journal that I'm aiming for.